definitely excited to get this conversation started to talk about how do we build community and power in schools. And so I guess my first question is the most simple question, or maybe it's not that simple. What is the purpose of your organization, and how have you personally grown throughout your time at your organization? And we can get started right.
Hi, thank you. Thank you for inviting me. Raquel Derfler. I'm from the high desert, the Antelope Valley. So for those of you that don't know, we are the northernmost portion of our county. We butt up right against Kern County, which is super conservative, which means the community I live in is fairly conservative. So our organization canceled a contract. We're a social justice coalition. We advocate for members of community that have been affected by the PC term unconstitutional policing, but when we talk with folks here, it's like victims of police violence and racism. In particular, it's the LA County Sheriff's Department that we address. But we also work to halt the school to prison pipeline that occurs in our schools. So, gosh, what was the other part of the question? My journey? I'm just a mother, so people are always taken aback by that. I'm a mother. I actually did not finish college, so that's to show folks that anybody can do this work if it's within your heart. So for me, it's just who I am. I've always been that person. If you bully someone, if you're cruel to someone, I'm gonna step up. I'm the little lady with the sword running toward the dragon by myself because I don't give an F. And so I came to this work because it's needed in our community. There are so many people that are affected on a daily basis by problematic encounters with law enforcement, but also the school districts that we are in. K through 8 are basically, they're racist institutions, but they don't have the ability to speak out because of fear of retaliation, number one, or it's just occurred for so long that there's actually just the sense of that's how it is. Like nothing, you can't say anything, nothing's gonna change. So this type of organization is very much needed in the area where I live. Like we have the ability to speak out and to say something. Folks know their rights, but they don't feel empowered to assert them. They know on a molecular level that the law enforcement has the ability to kill them. So I would say that kind of my superpower is I'm lacking that particular gene. I am not afraid of the police. I almost dare them, like, try something. So it's kind of fun, as you know. I'm like the rebel rouser. And as far as growth, I would say just understanding that not everybody agrees with this, not even the communities that are most affected. So that was very eye-opening for me to understand that parents whose children in the schools that have been harmed by law enforcement will turn around in the same breath say that they're needed. So that it was growth in my understanding that those that are harmed by the system still sometimes support that system because it's just so ingrained that law enforcement equals safety.
Afternoon, y'all. Peace, peace. My name is Amir, Whitaker, he, him, his. Senior Policy Counsel at the ACLU of Southern California. And ACLU is a civil rights organization. Specifically, ACLU SoCal has existed for about 100 years and does work in many different areas, whether it's immigration or free speech or gender reproductive rights and other areas. And I'm on the education equity team specifically, and that's where I've had the honor to work with y'all and some other folks in different spaces. And I come to this work through necessity and through my own, I like what Zoe said about recognizing that it's like your own individual healing and liberation that you have to address. And because I still have to check boxes for things that I did as a teenager. I still, I'm still legally discriminated against in certain ways because of mistakes I made. And so we try to create a world that protects the children from the harm that the government creates. And shout out to Children's Defense Fund, California and nationally, for the work that they do and for organizing this and convening these folks here today, because it's really important work and conversations. But But yeah, we have a lot of work to do in the ACLU specifically. I was hired 7 years ago when a certain person was elected president and people feared for their civil liberties. And ACLU raised like $50 million and they brought on like 30% more staff. And not all the staff have stayed on because of funding and different things, but now because of that same threat, looks like it might be re-emerging. The same sort of thing is happening. So that particular president, this is President Trump when he was elected, ACLU raised this money. And the ACLU took over 400 legal actions against them specifically. And even here in LA, whether it's the county, the city, like there was an ACLU case, I think in 2007, when one of the first times the city tried to criminalize, and house people sleeping on the street and punish them there. And we know that actually just went up to the Supreme Court, and statewide there's other things happening here, but LA County tried to do that first in 2007, and folks pushed back here. So our governments tend to create some of the harms that we were sharing. Like, Terrence, thank you for sharing your story, and he shared the government really wanted to put him away for 30 years, and that's over $1 million. Think of, like, if you invest $1 million into a young person, a fraction of that, right? So why is our government willing to put that money in at the tail end and not put the money in up front, a fraction of it to support? So that's the ACLU works in coalition and community with folks to try to push our governments to do more to support instead of traumatize and harm and that sort of stuff.
Thank you so much. And like I said before, I know we work together in a number of spaces, so I'll try to keep it brief, but one of the biggest things that we talk about from time to time is that as people get more daunted by the fight, it gets harder, right, for them to access the needs or even want to reach out or even want to door knock or phone bank, right? And so that's one of the main things when we're talking about organizing folks and having more than one individual in a space. Y'all are all leaders, not just one individual. And it's the believability in terms and conditions of what that looks like for folks, right? To actually believe in yourself so then you can actualize that and share that with other people. And so that kind of leads me into my next question. And mainly, we've recently talked about this, but I'm going to point it to kind of like a compare and contrast type of thing. If you could give us a lay of the land of what's currently going on in Antelope Valley, just to give folks some context, I think it's extremely important. We've talked about that, and I'm excited for you to kind of share. And then once we get that, I kind of want to do the same thing with you. Cool? Perfect.
Okay, lay of the land. So politically, so the Antelope Valley is, the main cities are Palmdale, Lancaster, and unincorporated areas of Little Rock and Lake Los Angeles. So think back to, okay, did anybody watch Dukes of Hazzard? Okay, so you know Boss Hogg? Okay, we have that in 2024. We have Rex Paris, who's been elected mayor he's been mayor for over 20 years. Okay, so people are like, how does that happen? Because people are so just disaffected. So we're a majority minority community. We actually are a D plus, I don't know how many, but you're like, how does he keep? Because he controls everything and everybody, not only in Lancaster, but also in Palmdale. So anybody that is in a political position is there because he put them there or he allows them to be there. And there's just, folks are just so beaten down that nobody tries to come up, or he goes and he'll pick people in community like, oh, there's someone that might be a leader, that might be something different, and then he offers them a meaningless title of something to buy them off, basically. So that is what occurs politically in the Antelope Valley. The Sheriff's Department, so Palmdale, Lancaster stations, we've been under a settlement agreement since 2015 with the DOJ, so you know that's bad because the DOJ, it takes a lot for them to step in. They're still not in compliance, and they just a few months ago finally have an agreed upon use of force policy. So from 2015 to 2024, there was not an approved use of force policy. So remember, that's like the kids in school are subjected to that because the resource deputies we have are sheriffs. So that would be like the police kind of situation. And then all of the school boards are right-leaning, and folks, as a community, it's very difficult. No one comes out. So I think it was Millie that was talking about, you need to fill the seats. Like, we can't fill the seats. Like, it's hard because the average person is just trying to get by. And so it's not like here is what I'm trying to say, where people will show up and people get it, right? No, it's hard to get the actual victims or people affected to care and show up to make that change. So that's like the area, that's kind of where we operate. So it's kind of crazy, but just basically like, we've been called like the South of California. Like, yeah.
Amir?
The south of SoCal, right? Because this is LA County, right? It's not too far from here. I mean, it's you know, not the, when you think of palm trees in Los Angeles and Southern California, you don't think of that, right? So it's similar. I mean, although we're in areas where the political landscape might not be as conservative, like for example, just here in LAUSD, where second largest school district in the country, many of the board members identify as progressive and different things, but they are still spending tens of millions of dollars on school police, on their own school police force, you know, not the sheriff and other things, and doing other things that harm the students. So I think in LA County alone, there are almost 100 school districts and 1.2 million students just in LA County. And then if you go to San Bernardino and Riverside, it's more students, and that's in our jurisdiction of ACLU of Southern California. And we're seeing things that vary so much from some school districts that are just literally just eliminating all school counselor positions while hiring police officers, because there are more students in schools that have, you know, that have police and no counselors or social workers and nurses than not. You know, that's the norm, not just in LA County or in Southern California, is to have a school that has a police officer, but probably no social worker or nurse. That was, you mentioned at Dorsey,
Yes, yeah, same thing,
you know,
yeah.
1 day a week, you might have your school
And that
nurse.
was well over 10 plus years ago, so.
Right.
Go ahead.
And I've received emails and videos from students at Dorsey with situations where the school police come and they're using pepper spray, kind of like air freshener. Several times at Dorsey they did this, and no school nurse there to even respond to the terror that the police are doing to children on the campus. So it's very real. And again, this is LAUSD, that's viewed as a progressive school district, but these sort of things are still happening. But in some school districts, we just had a school district in Riverside County, they just eliminated a full DEI program. And you know, they're moving backwards there. So some school districts are stepping back from the commitments that were made in 2020, when some school districts and some schools started acknowledging the past and the harm that needed to be healed, and they're already retreating. In LAUSD, that's another example too, where they created a program, or the community members forced them to create a program to support Black students, and they're already retreating on that, and it hasn't even been 3 years. So we're seeing the backlash all over Southern California and the retreat from just some of the victories we had in 2020.
Absolutely, and that's something we talk about too. So much time and energy goes into mobilizing folks, having individuals in the space that feel comfortable enough to share their stories and speak out, and then we have to attend these meetings because they're so early, you know, that we have to ask for time off, and we're understanding parent situations, student situations, all at the same time in order to advocate for collective change, right? And so throughout that work, it can be very daunting. And Raquel, you said something, and like I said, we talk about this a lot. Just getting folks to show up is, I mean, you know, it's so important, but it's one of the main things that is an obstacle, right? One of the biggest things that I kind of encountered, and I feel like I should have mentioned this, but a number of years ago, I was a teacher, right? And so I taught through the Freedom Schools program for a number of years, and I remember one of my kids, he, you know, had IEP, he was on the whole, like, out of every single class, my class was the only class he felt comfortable with. But as we all know, Freedom Schools is only in the summer. And so we started to develop a conversation around, well, if he's not here for these 3 months, the rest of those months, what ends up happening, right? And so we kind of broke down how to communicate with teachers, right? How to communicate with other students within this classroom. But that took time and energy and effort, and it took community, right? And that's what this panel is kind of about. It's not necessarily just about students, parents, assembly members, whatever. It's really talking about how do we actualize a community, right? And really put that into place for not only short-term, obviously, goals and meeting that, but for those long-term community building projects that we're all passionate about. And so I guess that goes into my next question for you both is currently right now, and I may phrase this a little bit off, but because the work is so, daunting at times, but what are you excited about at your organizations to tackle? We just got finished, working with Holly Mitchell and, really advocating on behalf of folks, right? Parents, students, young incarcerated folks for a number of months. It was a very long time, but it was something I was excited about, like I said, to step into, I call it like the ring, right? Stepping into the ring and having that battle because we are here at the meetings and we're having these conversations and we don't care if the meeting is all day. We're not going to leave until we give a public comment and talk about this and make sure that our voices are being heard, especially on behalf of other individuals that are marginalized, because it's not about us. So, like I said, currently, what are some things that you're excited about within your organizations that you're tackling, right? What are you guys into right now?
So we do like a dual, so we have actually 3 components. We have a wellness component, but we also have our educational justice and our criminal justice. So right now it's really educational justice, the most is occurring. So you were talking about the work we did with Supervisor Mitchell, but we've also sued our high school district for discrimination in discipline against our Black students and students with disabilities. So that's like an area that is not as exciting for folks when we talk about the school to prison pipeline. We want to talk just about like the school police, that's, the citations and the arrests that are pushing kids out of school, but not enough talk is centered around the acceptable ways, like the expulsions, the suspensions. So we sued, there's 2 portions. The first portion is completed, we're very excited. Where we were able to link in court a particular policy that the district had that was breaking a specific law meant to prevent discrimination either on race or disability. So the high school district has to redo their entire discipline policy. So we're excited about that. We're now going into like the civil rights portion where the policy may be lawful, but how it's being implemented is where discrimination is occurring. Because we know if you're a Black student or a student with disability, you are punished more frequently and more harshly for the same offense than if you are a white student or a student without disability. So we're excited about that, but that's the part that people find boring. So I'm excited, like, how do we make this exciting for folks to understand? Like, what we did was freaking groundbreaking. Like, that's systemic change. Like, forever more students will not be discriminated against when it comes to those types of, those exclusionary, discipline policies that occur. We're also excited, we do work with Professor Alex Vitale. He's out of Brooklyn College. I don't know if anybody has heard of him. His infamous book is The End of Policing. So we worked with him for a couple of years. So he's finishing up a report for us. It's alternatives to police in school, because what's scary to folks is like, if you don't have that one police, regardless that you have campus security, like what do you have? So this is like laying out, this is what you would put in place of that, so folks are less afraid. So we're going to be doing a launch of that report. Will be the first week of November. We're also looking at doing an LA launch as well the next day. So everyone here will get an invitation to that, probably at Loyola Law School is where that will be occurring.
Nice. Definitely want to give a shout out to that work, and I think I attended a webinar or something with Alex there, and he's a rock star. Definitely recommend that book. It's so groundbreaking. One of the things I'm most excited about is our State of Black Education report card, and I brought a few copies here. It's a comprehensive but short, 6-page document that we published in anniversary with the Brown versus Board case, which was 70 years ago this year, in 1954. This was a case that the ACLU was involved in, along with NAACP and others. But something worth noting, and it's on the timeline here that we have, because I have an educational justice timeline on here. So almost 10 years after Brown versus Board, in 1963, the ACLU had to sue LAUSD for still maintaining segregated, separate, and unequal schools. So 10 years after Brown, 10 years after the Supreme Court decided Brown, LAUSD still was operating segregated school districts, and they really defended it in some really heinous ways. But then by 1971, LAUSD was actually the most segregated school district in the nation. I mean, think about that for a second. Especially me, I did this work as a civil rights lawyer in Alabama and Florida and other states where you have all these assumptions about segregation and thoughts there, but to come to LA and see that it's actually more segregated here in different ways, and some of the policies, so we talked about that, but in this report we also talked about 24 areas, not just school segregation, and that's what this tree represents, but it's 24 areas of educational injustice or inequality or oppression that we identified with state and federal data. And I'm a researcher, I was a researcher at UCLA before I came to ACLU, but for example, declining enrollment, which is number 3. There's a black exodus in California that really is a state of emergency where the enrollment of black students has dropped by almost 50% since 2003. So from 2003 to 2023, the amount of black students dropped by 47% in California. That's black families being pushed out. And I mean, if you've been in LA, you know that the black families are being pushed out here into other areas too, or either, to the IE or other areas, or going to other states, because we need to examine what in these conditions are creating this. And we actually identify some here. So, for example, racial harassment and bullying. Black students are disproportionately bullied. So that's something that would make them less likely to want to enroll in school, make black parents are increasingly taking their students out and homeschooling them and different things. But school arrest, which is an area we worked with both of you at, with black students being the most disproportionately arrested. So let me just see, school arrest is number 18. So there's a whole school to prison pipeline section that's numbers 17 through 24, and each of these are documented areas where black students have unequal outcomes. So over 20% of black students are handcuffed during police stops, compared to only 9% of white students. So that's statewide. Black students are twice as much likely to be handcuffed. And I don't have time to go through all 24 of the statistics or even half of them, but I recommend you check them out. And then more importantly, because the numbers are one part, but we also have a section in here, it'll be on the back page, because it's a bit out of order, I apologize for that, but we have quotes from black students, parents, educators, organizers from all across the state talking about what they're encountering in their school and what should be done to confront that and address it, because we want to talk about the problems, but we also want to talk about the solutions. And then lastly, we have a section in here that's legal obligations and opportunities that just highlight some of the things under law that could be done to support students of color specifically, because there's a lot of attacks on whether they call it, they call it all sorts of stuff. I don't even need to call it what they call it, but anti-woke movements and different things, which leads to the last thing I'll talk about is our Free to Learn campaign at the ACLU. And I don't have any materials for that, but we've created toolkits, advocacy letters, and other things to fight back against these attacks on diverse education happening all across the country.
No, absolutely, absolutely. I think to your point, we're talking also about systemic. This is not just in one area. This is all across the board, right? And how these practices really do limit upward mobility, right? And from, let's just say, walking into class, I remember, for those who work with me, I love a good fitted hat. So I would usually be wearing a hat, but what does that look like for me walking into class 10 plus years ago with a fitted hat, right?
With a youth control complex where we want to control children. Your hat doesn't disrupt anything at all, right? Exactly. If you're wearing a hoodie, doesn't disrupt anything, but if you walked into a school that way, they want to control the children, and yeah.
Exactly. And so just like I said, examining the intricacies of why the school to prison pipeline is so harmful, it kind of leads me to my next question. And I feel like you both kind of pinpointed to what you're experiencing currently, but I kind of want to know, when you're talking to your parents, your community, right, organizers, your community members, but more importantly, the youth, what are they telling you their concerns are, right? What do they care about, or what are they passionate about in changing in their communities?
So we have to get it secondhand, because we're not allowed in the schools. Even before we sue them, they know who we are, and so they don't let us. But we did have a listening session with Professor the tally. So I do know what parents are concerned about when it comes to for their children when they go to school. Things that the police can't fix. The police cannot fix the bullying. Like, that's not what they're there for. So bullying was a thing. Drugs, believe it or not, sex trafficking, because people like come through our area to get to like other places like Las Vegas. So there are areas, just where the police couldn't help. And even when they saw it, so parents would tell us, like, they see the drugs that are there on, in the cafeteria, and they don't do anything about it. So, and also the youth are just so used to it, like they're totally it's normalized. So in our high schools, there's a resource deputy, but probation is also in our high schools. And the campus security has become very radicalized. So I remember going and asking a student, so one of the victories we talked about, like, is we disrupted the contract. So there was no police during summer school because it had expired. Like, we messed them up so bad in the approval process. But I remember going to the school to double check. So there was some young folks that were standing there, and I remember asking them, like, hey, have you seen the resource deputy? And he said, oh, you mean my probation officer? Like, no. But it was just matter of fact, it wasn't a big deal. No, not the other ones. So the children just think it's normal, or they even think it's necessary. So we were at a continuation school doing something, and the youth were like, oh no, but we need them here. But I'm like, yeah, but you were sent here to the continuation school because you got kicked out of the traditional school. So a lot of times it's fighting just the perceived notion that they belong there. So that's kind of where we're at, more as retraining folks, even the youth, to be like, okay, no, you shouldn't be treated, that's not normal. One last little anecdote, I remember showing, maybe he was 14-year-old, the video of Michaela Robinson, who was a young student at Lancaster High who was body slammed by the resource deputy, and her crime was that she was walking away after not handing her phone. So most of the time, adults are like, okay, that's bad. I remember asking the child, what do you think about that? And he told me she must have done something really bad. Not that a 30-year-old shouldn't be body slamming a 16-year-old, but she did something bad, so that's why, she deserved it, basically. Yeah. So for us, it's just retraining youth. Okay, yeah, you have worth. They shouldn't treat you that way. You don't, need police there.
Thanks for sharing that. We have so much to undo with that. And it's not just with our young people, politicians, parents, elders, and different folks, because propaganda has been so pervasive. I think, is it Bad Boys 4 that came out or just came out? That's the 4th series of it. That whole series is propaganda. And I didn't even realize it until I was watching it in law school and saw all the civil rights violations that they normalized. And I was, it was disgusting that propaganda. So we would see if we trust, or not me, but people trust the police and assume if they're doing something, they have the authority to do it. There's the good guy and the bad guy, and the police is the good guy. The police are usually the good guy. And related, so something we're working on, and this is actually with CDF California, we've been in coalition every year for the past few years hosting a town hall around this time of year in Long Beach specifically, because we're actually coming up on the anniversary of the murder of a young young student by the name of Mona Rodriguez, who in 2021, she was suited, in Long Beach, and a fight happened. And instead of de-escalating the fight, and actually the fight was over, but the school police or armed officer in Long Beach Unified, sent bullets flying through the window. And so actually, as we approach our anniversary right now, because she was shot in September 2021, I believe, but they took off life support in October, but let's just have a moment of silence for Mona Rodriguez and all the young people who have encountered harm or even death at the consequence of our governments and systems. Thank you, Ashe. Just want to say her name, Mona Rodriguez. Mona Rodriguez. Say her name, Mona Rodriguez.
Mona Rodriguez.
So in Long Beach, we're working with counselors, public advocates is the other one, along with CDF and ACLU, the teachers union in Long Beach and others, to get them to reimagine school counseling and actually have staff that would support students and help them, heal from different things. Because yeah, we understand that there are fights and different things that are happening, right? But we want them to be responded to with things aside from bullets. And so that's one of the things we're engaged in. But not just in Long Beach, we're trying to get that all over. But Long Beach is a specific one because CDF published a report, I think it was like in 2016, that showed Long Beach had some of the highest ratios when it comes to students to staff. So you can just have a wide variation, even in LA County, even though these are all public schools. I mean, we know that you can have a variation within a single school district. You can go to one school that might have access to more resources than the other, but you see really large variations across school districts. So we're trying to just level the playing field and get students to support and really remove these harmful practices from the campus. We have been saying school police should have never been on campus in the first place, because what's the worst that can happen? Mona Rodriguez. Right, and now in California, we actually have the distinction of saying several young people have been killed by police, school police. And the other one was Raheem Brown in 2010 in Oakland. So we're trying to remove these harms and then increase the supports for students.
No, like I said before, I mean, we talked, offline, but thank you so much for sharing. And I think what's more important is that you're providing people with access to actualizing power for themselves, right? We talk about that within our schools, we feel powerless. Within our communities, at times we may feel powerless. But these organizations and these initiatives that are being put in place really let or allow folks, right, to actualize that for themselves.